The first thing she said on the phone was, "Mom, I love you. You're my best friend." And I didn't know what's going on. I said, "I love you too, and you're a good friend of mine."
But there was more.
She says, I just want to let you know, Rick is a mess today. And I just wish I had said, "Well, if he's such a mess, why don't you come to my house? We'll have breakfast."
Rick and Connie Dabate's now teenage sons live with an aunt who told the court that at one point one of the sons asked now Connie Dabate's family can finally breathe.
I just feel like, I don't know, a surge from up above. I just feel the strength coming to me, right now.
December 23rd, 2015, Ellington, Connecticut. 2 days before Christmas. A small, peaceful town blanketed in quiet routine. But that morning, emergency dispatchers receive a frantic 911 call. A man's voice breaks through the line. "My wife's been shot," he says. "There was a break-in. I was tied up. She didn't make it." When police arrive at the upscale home on Birchview Drive, they find a chilling scene. In the basement, 39-year-old Connie Dabate lies dead from a gunshot wound. Her husband, Richard Dabate, is alive, wrists bound with zip ties, a minor burn on his leg, claiming he survived a masked intruder who ambushed the house. He says the killer vanished without a trace. But investigators can't shake a feeling, something's off. There are no signs of forced entry. No items stolen. No footprints in the snow. And Richard's injuries seem suspiciously minor for a violent home invasion. It wouldn't take long before that feeling turns into a full investigation, and what cracked the case wide open wasn't a confession or a witness, but a piece of wearable tech on Connie's wrist. A Fitbit. The device would reveal a secret timeline, one that contradicted everything Richard told police, and exposed a carefully constructed lie. Before the headlines, before the courtroom and the accusations, there was Connie Dabate. Born Connie Ridgway, she was raised in Vernon, Connecticut, a small-town girl who grew into a confident, determined woman. Those who knew her described her as warm, full of energy, and fiercely devoted to the people she loved. She met Richard Dabate in the early 2000s. They married in 2003, bought a home in Ellington, and eventually welcomed 2 sons into the world. Connie worked in financial services. She was reliable, respected, and the kind of person coworkers remembered, not for being loud, but for her kindness and dedication. Outside of work, she threw herself into parenting and fitness. She loved Zumba classes, yoga, and had a deep affection for animals. She even helped raise money for local shelters. To the outside world, the Dabates were the picture of stability: 2 kids, a dog, a good neighborhood, and a solid marriage. Friends said they seemed like a well-matched couple, she, energetic and nurturing, he, quiet and reserved. But when you looked closer, there were fractures beneath the surface. According to police interviews and Richard's own statements, both he and Connie had been unfaithful earlier in the marriage. They had weathered past infidelities, but the trust had never fully returned. Connie was open with friends about trying to make it work, especially for the kids. But she also had boundaries. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind. And those closest to her said she'd never accept being made a fool of, not twice. In December of 2015, she was making plans for the holidays. Shopping for gifts. Attending her usual fitness classes. Smiling in photos taken days before her death. No signs of fear. No hint of what was coming. But behind Connie's back, something had shifted. Her husband wasn't just cheating, he was building a new life. And he couldn't afford for her to find out. At 10:11 a.m. on December 23, 2015, Richard Dabate called 911 from inside his home in Ellington, Connecticut. His voice trembled as he told the dispatcher a terrifying story, that he'd interrupted a burglary in progress. A tall, stocky man in a camouflage suit and mask, he claimed, had broken in, tied him up with zip ties, tortured him with a blowtorch, and shot Connie in the basement before fleeing. Police arrived minutes later. What they found didn't quite match the story. Connie was dead. She'd been shot once in the stomach and once in the back of the head with a .357 Magnum revolver, a gun that Richard had purchased just 2 months earlier. Her body was found in the basement near a partially decorated Christmas tree. She was still wearing her Fitbit. Richard was upstairs, alive and alert. He had superficial wounds and was loosely bound with zip ties, which, according to responding officers, looked like they'd been fastened in a way that could have been done by the victim himself. He had a burn mark on his leg, allegedly from a blowtorch, but no serious injuries. He was treated and released from the hospital that same day. And that's when the inconsistencies started piling up. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No damaged doors. The couple's valuables, including Connie's purse, jewelry, and electronics, were all untouched. The home security system had been deactivated by someone who knew the passcode. Detectives also noticed something else. Richard was unusually composed. He recounted the story of the masked intruder in elaborate detail, but his version of events shifted over time. He couldn't explain how the killer entered or why nothing had been taken. Police seized the house as a crime scene. They took the gun. They pulled the home's alarm logs. They collected both Richard's and Connie's electronic devices. And they kept the Fitbit. When detectives later downloaded Connie's activity data, they were stunned. The device showed she had walked over 1,200 feet in the house after Richard said she was already dead. Not only was she alive well past 9 a.m., she was active, walking, moving, and possibly fighting for her life. The crime scene didn't suggest a home invasion. It suggested something else entirely, a staged setup, a carefully planted story, and a husband trying to rewrite a timeline, one his wife's wrist had already recorded. In the days following Connie's murder, suspicion quietly shifted toward the man who had called 911. Richard Dabate told detectives he'd fought for his life that morning, burned, tied up, barely escaped. But the facts didn't match. And when they dug deeper into his personal life, the motive began to take shape. Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was leading a double life. Investigators discovered he'd been romantically involved with a woman named Michelle, someone he'd met years earlier and reconnected with in 2015. That fall, the affair intensified. By December, Michelle was pregnant with Richard's child. In text messages reviewed by police, Richard had promised her a future together. He told her he was leaving Connie. That he'd filed for divorce. That he was getting a new place and would raise their baby with her. But none of it was true. There were no divorce filings. No separation. And according to friends and family, Connie had no idea about the pregnancy, or the relationship. Detectives also reviewed Richard's financial records. The family was in debt. He had maxed out credit cards, outstanding personal loans, and a mortgage they were struggling to maintain. Divorce would mean splitting assets, exposing infidelity, and likely losing custody of his sons. It was a perfect storm, a man with mounting financial pressure, a pregnant mistress, and a wife who could take it all away. Instead of telling the truth, Richard chose to fabricate a fantasy, a narrative where he was the victim, not the aggressor. But his wounds were shallow. His story was full of holes. And his technology, phone records, GPS data, alarm logs, told a very different version of events. One where Richard stayed home longer than he claimed. One where he typed on a computer long after Connie was supposedly dead. Prosecutors would later argue, this wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated decision. Richard had bought the murder weapon 2 months earlier. He kept the receipt. He had the motive, the means, and the time. All he needed was to make sure no one could question his version of the story. He never expected his wife's Fitbit would become the most credible witness. The turning point came not from a witness, but from a wristband. Connie's Fitbit, still strapped to her body when police found her, became the one piece of evidence Richard couldn't manipulate. Investigators retrieved the activity log from the morning of December 23rd. According to Richard, Connie was killed shortly after 9 a.m. But the device told a different story. Connie's Fitbit showed she was still walking around the house at 9:23. Then again at 9:40. She took over 1,200 steps, long after Richard claimed she'd been shot. The data didn't just challenge his timeline, it destroyed it. Meanwhile, the couple's alarm system showed the house had been disarmed at 8:50 a.m., meaning someone with access turned it off. Richard's email account had been logged into from the home computer. He claimed he wasn't there. But his phone had never left the property. Prosecutors presented it all in court: the gun Richard purchased weeks before the murder, the deleted emails he tried to hide, the credit card purchases for his mistress, and the Fitbit trail that stitched it all together. Richard had crafted a version of reality that relied on chaos. But the technology surrounding him had captured order, one click, one step, one lie at a time. 7 years after Connie Dabate was killed, the trial of Richard Dabate began in Rockville Superior Court. It was a long wait, stalled by the complexity of the evidence and the pandemic. But when the courtroom finally opened in April 2022, it was packed. Over weeks of testimony, prosecutors painted a picture of a man who wanted out of his marriage, but didn't want the cost. A man who had already moved on, emotionally, physically, and saw murder as the cleaner solution. The defense argued Richard was the victim of a random home invasion. They questioned the accuracy of Fitbit data, pointing out that step counts can sometimes register arm movements. They said the evidence was circumstantial. But the jury disagreed. In May 2022, Richard Dabate was convicted of murder, tampering with evidence, and making false statements. The judge sentenced him to 65 years in prison, calling his actions calculated and cold-blooded. But even after conviction, questions remain. What kind of man murders his wife while their children are at school, then stages a fake assault to buy sympathy? What trauma, if any, shaped the kind of control he needed to maintain over every detail of his life, even in death? Did anyone close to Richard see the signs? Or had he mastered the role of loyal husband so well that no one ever thought to look closer? Friends of Connie still struggle with the silence leading up to that day. No cries for help. No obvious warning. Just a woman trying to hold her family together, unaware that the person she trusted most was planning her end. Her 2 sons were left without a mother. And soon after, without a father. Richard's mistress gave birth to their child weeks after the murder. That child will grow up knowing that the person who created them is also the one responsible for ending another life. And there's still one chilling thought that lingers. If Connie hadn't worn her Fitbit that day, would anyone have ever known the truth?